What's up, crew? Welcome back to Libertalia Game Supply. Today we're going to take a look at Valmonica. Now this was a pretty weird deck to build because it didn't seem like it fit super well with any particular archetype in the game already, so it's hard to determine what it really is meant to do. I think ultimately it's a grind deck, a stall deck, and then eventually you'll build up enough counters on your two pendulum monsters to start making some explosive extra deck plays, and that would be how you ended up winning from there. I think the initial mistake I made was trying to load this thing up with trap cards and try to play it as like a stall or like a traditional chain burn type deck, and it just really doesn't do that. You want to try to take advantage of all the in-archetype spells and traps because they're all dual modal effects that you can choose from. So it's like playing twice as many spells and traps, and I think that's kind of like the main gimmick of the deck that makes it unique compared to everything else. Now first things first, for the pendulum monsters here, we've got the angel and the demon. The dark and the light pendulum monster, one's a fairy, one's a fiend. They essentially have the same effect as each other in hand. If you have one of them, you can discard one other card and then place the opposite pendulum monster and the one you have in hand in the pendulum zones. So if I have the angel, I can discard something else, place the angel and the demon out of my deck into the pendulum zones, and now you're set up for the rest of the deck to work the way it's supposed to. While they're in the zones, the angel allows you to link summon during your opponent's battle phase, so really useful, and actually it's a big part of what makes the deck any sort of usable. And when the demon's in the pendulum zone, your opponent's monsters lose 100 attack for every resonance counter on each of the pendulum monsters that you have on the field, and so that can start to cut in pretty deep to what your opponent's attacks are. Now normally that wouldn't matter all that much, but because it's kind of a grindy deck, it is somewhat important because your monsters aren't huge, but if you dwindle away your opponent's monsters' attack points, it's a lot harder for them to attack over yours. While they're on the field, their effects are just the inverse of one another. So when the angel's on the field, it's the one that deals with effects that boost life points, and so you can target a spell or trap in your graveyard, banish it, and then it copies the life point gain effect of that spell or trap. So if you look at one, just so you can see what I'm talking about, they all have two different effects. One is gain life points and one is lose life points. This monster can copy all of the gain life point effects on the spells and the traps, and then this one can copy all the lose life point effects on the spells and traps by banishing it out of the graveyard, and it also does the same life point manipulation effect when you were to activate that as a spell or trap card, so it can add counters to your pendulum monsters and your pendulum zones. We also went with the Performage engine here. Triple damage juggler allows you to search the other ones. The trick clown that can either recur itself, or usually the flame eater would be the only other one I'm targeting. It costs you 1,000 life points, so it gets you a resonance counter, and then if you summon this, it costs another 500, so it gets you another resonance counter, and it burns your opponent for 500, meaning if you were to do this and then link up into the fairy link monster for Valmonica and use its effect, you essentially have 8k damage right there. The hat tricker's in here because it's a free body, and all of your link monsters are pretty generic, or at least the ones that we're interested in using most of the time, and so having that free body is good. It's also level 4, and we're playing that little rank 4 toolbox there. And then the Flame Eater is not once per turn, so anytime it gets summoned, both you and your opponent will take 500 damage, so it gets you a counter every time. If you somehow loop it, you could probably summon it twice in a turn pretty consistently. Then you get 2 counters, your opponent would take 1,000 damage. It works well enough to leave it in here, I think. We've got the 1,000 blades. When it's in the graveyard, it just summons itself back when you take effect damage, and you can essentially do that to yourself at will. I think one of the strengths of the deck is that it doesn't really care about the normal summon all that much because of how much it's focused on putting both of your pendulum scales on board as quickly as possible, and so you're not really normal summoning any of these as a starter. You're trying to get both of these on the board as a starter and then just dump what you have left in your hand, and so it's pretty easy to get like both of these in the graveyard to start using their effects. The Zephyros, kind of similar to that 1,000 blades. When it's in the graveyard, you can bounce a card back to your hand, burn yourself for 400 and summon this. It's a level 4, so it gives you that access to the extra deck, gives you that counter, and it lets you recycle Jurigato, which I felt has been like probably one of my favorite cards in this deck so far. So the Jurigato during battle phase can special summon itself as a quick effect, and you gain 1,000 life points. It can also tribute itself as a quick effect to target a face-up monster you control and boost its attack by 1,000, so it can kind of help you attack over something that's bigger that your demon didn't quite get low enough yet. But what I like most about it is that it's a quick effect that gives you another counter on the angel. And the Angel having 3 counters when you pass the turn, or having 3 counters in your opponent's battle phase, is really important with this deck, because that will allow you to link someone into the Fairy Link monster, which will then wipe the board pretty well, and then it can give you that 3 attacks on your own turn. And so that's kind of your main like explosive opponent interactable play that you're looking for, and the Jurigato can set you up for that pretty nice. The Spooky Dogwood's kind of a similar concept. At the start of your opponent's turn, you discard it. I guess it could be at the start of your turn, but that's not going to be nearly as valuable. And then every time they special summon after this card resolves, you gain life points equal to that monster's attack points. So every time you do it, you're gaining a counter, you're gaining life points, which will be fairly relevant in this deck because you're going to be burning yourself for life points pretty often. Or if they choose not to special summon at all and you don't gain any life points, the life points that you have are cut in half. But that also means your opponent just passed you the turn without doing anything outside of their normal summon. And so unless it's a back row deck, you're probably winning that game right then and there. Now for the spells, all of the non-field spells, as I mentioned, have 2 effects. The first one is you gain 500 and then you get the effect. The second one is you lose 500 and you get the effect. So for Skelta, you can place a card from your hand on the bottom of your deck and draw 2, or you can add a Valmonica spell or trap from your deck to your hand when you lose life points. Either of those are pretty good. It gives you draw power within the archetype. It also lets you search out your other spells and traps, and because these can both copy the effects of the cards in the graveyard, you could effectively get both effects each turn if you wanted to, and for the traps you can more easily get both effects each turn. That second effect, to search a spell or trap, I think is probably the better one, just because that's not a very common effect to be able to search out in archetype spells and traps, and this deck kind of revolves around them. So having in your opening hand one of these and either of these plus something to discard can usually get you to a point where you have enough counters to like maybe Jurigato to get you up to 3, or just get you to 3 outright and pass the turn, and that's really important. For the Versaire on a life point gain, you can excavate cards from the top of your deck until you hit a Valmonica card and add it to your hand, so it's a searcher. It doesn't dump anything to the graveyard, it just shuffles them back in, so it's just kind of like a luck of the draw. Or it can Foolish Burial a Valmonica card from your deck to the graveyard, and that can be your spells and traps, which is important just because you can copy them with the main deck monsters. And then the Intonaire acts as kind of like a Monster Reborn, so at a life point gain, you can special summon a monster out of your graveyard, but your opponent gets to choose the monster. The only downside to that would be is if this is in your graveyard, it's a level 3, and so it wouldn't allow you access to your rank 4 monsters, but you can just link it away anyway, so it doesn't really matter. And at a life point loss, you can take a level 4 monster from your graveyard and add it back to your hand, so you could recycle a Jurigato. You can get one of these back that was used as Xyz material or something. The reason this is at 1 and the other ones are at 3 is because it's not a starter like the other ones are. It doesn't really get the deck going, but once the deck is going, being able to search it and then copy it can put a pretty nasty board up. For the field spell, on activation, it searches a Valmonica monster, so either of your pendulums, and then when it's on the field, if you hit 3 resonance counters on one of your monsters, it can then steal a monster your opponent controls until the end phase. So that can be nice as an interrupt, like if you were to do the Jurigato, like you have 2, you pass turn, you Jurigato to bounce it up to 3, and then you steal something to interrupt the combo. Or on your own turn, you can bounce it up to 3, steal a monster to get it out of the way, link it off so that they don't get it back, and then you've opened up their board to hopefully attack for game or huge damage or whatever. So pretty versatile. I didn't think that that effect steal was going to happen very often, but it happens often enough for it to be worth it. We got the 1 terraforming for this also, just because it's like 4 additional copies of your pendulums, and you really just need to see one of them in your opening hand to get the deck going. We got triple Book of Moon just because traps are a little too slow. We need to be able to interact on our turn too to try to protect our stuff until it's time to really go for the big explosive play, and I felt like Book of Moon did that the best. And then this is a new card, 3 Angel of Blue Tears. This comes out in Maze in January, so not quite yet, but it's really interesting. So you target a card on the field, either yours or your opponent's, and then the opponent of the controller of that card takes damage equal to the number of cards in their hand times 200. So if I target your monster, I take 200 damage for every card in my hand, so it gets me a counter. Then whatever monster I targeted has its effect negated until the end of that turn, so it shuts off whatever that would be. And then if it's in the graveyard when I take effect damage, which you can just do at will, you can banish it out of the graveyard to set a normal trap from your deck to the field. So you could get creative with that and play other normal traps, but both of the Valmonica trap cards are normal traps, and they're both really good for being in archetype specific trap cards, and so that's more than enough of search targets for me. And then the one Foolish, just because having a little bit of graveyard setup is pretty nice in this deck. The traps both have that either or for life point gain or loss, but if you control a Valmonica and Link monster, you can just get both effects. So for the Guiding Rhythm, at a gain, you can destroy or spell or trap on the field, and at a loss, you can return a monster on the field to the hand. Both pretty solid, pretty like standard effects that are good to have. And they're both copyable off of the main deck monsters, and if you were to use that copying effect while you have one of the links up, you just get them both again, so it can do some damage to a board. The Selecting Melody is more of a protection card for your own board. At a life point gain, your opponent can't target Valmonica monster cards you control with card effects, so kind of protects you from some stuff there. And at a life point loss, you can negate the effects of one monster your opponent controls, so similar to the blue tiers. I would consider playing a second copy of the Guiding Rhythm just because that effect is so good. The only reason I didn't is because it's pretty easy to just get to it. You can search it off of the Skelta, it's pretty easy to get to, and then once it's in the graveyard, you can just use it again. But it is a good card. You have 3 searches for it in the deck also, so bumping it to 2 wouldn't be the worst, I don't think. For the extra deck, we'll start with the easy stuff first. Typhon, excellent card. Love it way more than I thought I ever would. Zeus, still a good card. And then these 3 or 4 are pretty good standard like rank 4 toolbox. I think the Daigusto Emerald I would not classify quite as good as these other 3, just for control, back row hate, graveyard control. This I was playing just because if you have some of these in your graveyard, you want to have them back in your hand, just because if they keep popping like one of them over and over, or they remove it in some way and you don't have a way to get it back, it really hinders what the deck can do. You want to be able to keep it on the board, but that doesn't come up that often because there's 3 of them, and if they pop it, it goes to the extra deck anyway, and that's kind of what this was going towards, but there's just not enough pendulum monsters for that to be worth it. So you could probably turn this into Dugaris into higher rated link monsters, just so you have some type of like additional layer of play beyond your 6 main ones here. For the 2 pendulum links, I just figured it would fit in all right. I don't use them, would cut them also for something else. You can kind of open up the extra deck with these 4 cards into whatever you want. Maybe like Utopia double package for more OTK ability, whatever you like. I would say these 6 are the ones that you're going to summon all the time, maybe even every turn if your board keeps getting wiped. This could probably go to 1 because it's less good than this, but the Sorcerer and the Odd Deity are for sure the best cards in the extra deck. So the Sorcerer, if you have seen the Memento deck profile I uploaded like a week ago now, it's a really interesting card that has almost no use unless it's in a deck like this or like Memento. So when it does damage, or when a monster it's pointing to does damage, you gain life points equal to that damage that you just did, so you get a counter for that. Then when you gain life points, you can burn each player for 1,000 damage, and you get a counter for that. It is once per turn, but even if you weren't using its first effect to gain life points, you have so many life point gain effects in the deck already that you can essentially burn for 1,000 damage every turn, as long as you keep it on the board. For the Divine Oddity and the Odd Deity, in order for them to be summoned, it's only 1 effect monster, which is really easy, but you need 3 resonance counters on the corresponding pendulum monster. So the Angel needs 3 to summon the Odd Deity, and the Demon needs 3 to summon the Oddity. The Oddity, when it's on the board, if it were to be destroyed, you can remove 3 resonance counters from the board to protect it. Also, on your opponent's turn, as a quick effect, you can target one of your Valmonica normal spells or traps that is in your graveyard or banished, so it can give you a 3rd use of like your traps or any of your spells or whatever, and it just copies the effect. It doesn't move it anywhere or whatever. Were it to do that on the traps, you get both effects there also, because it is the link monster that you would require in this card's activation requirement. And then this is the game closer here, the Odd Deity. So you can summon either of them, I guess, during battle phase, but it's likely going to be this one because of the effect of the Angel. When it's summoned, you can destroy monsters your opponent controls up to the number of resonance counters you control. So you're going to be at least at 3, probably more, because you have counters on each of the monsters, most likely. So it can essentially wipe a board of monsters unless they can protect themselves. Then you can remove 3 resonance counters from a pendulum monster you control, and it can make a 2nd and 3rd attack for that turn. It's got 2,500 attack, so if you summon it and wipe the board and then they have to pass to you, and then you use it's a 2nd effect to attack 3 times, you got 75k damage right there, and making up that other 500 isn't hard with stuff like the Flame Eater to burn or the Sorcerer to burn. So Really interesting card, really cool card. So those are my final thoughts. If you tested this deck out, let me know how you like it and what you're playing with it. I hated it at first, but after playing around with it, it's kind of interesting. I probably wouldn't pick it up in real life. I do not like the artwork on these at all. These are kind of cool, but ugh. I'll get a replay of like how you would set up a board with the 3 counters on it. It's fairly easy. The deck does it well. You just have to kind of like know what it is it wants to do. And so I'll throw that up in case anybody's curious about that. But otherwise, happy deck building. I'll see you guys in the next one. Have a good one. Goodbye.